Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the African Bird Fair. It's Friday night, and I'm here with Dan and Sandiswa, our guests and fellow birders, who are going to be entertaining us with some anecdotes from across Africa when it comes to birding. I know that many viewers with us tonight will have stories when it comes to expeditions that they've been on, whether it's up nearby in the Kruger Park or further afield in the continent, or just in your backyard, walking into big game while twitching a certain lifer, or basically Dan stepping foot in the sewerage works, as some of you may identify with. So we just wanted to welcome you and ease into this African Bird Fair this Friday evening, and have a bit of a self-deprecating laugh at ourselves as birders. So welcome Sandiswa and Dan, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, thank you, Andy. It's wonderful to be here tonight.
So, guys, we all as birders have one of these stories, if not many more. I know Sandiswa has some hilarious but also painful stories.
Yes.
Tell us your thoughts on some of those.
I think the main thing is that we all have fallen somewhere, even if you didn't injure yourself. But some of us have re-injured. Like for me, I used to play soccer. And so I got kicked on the knee. I had to stop soccer, and then I forget about it until winter time. And that reminds me when I have to crawl through some thicket or wherever. Because I remember the first time I photographed, what is this thing? An African goshawk. It was late at work. I wasn't supposed to be at work at that time. But because I saw a bird that looked like one of the birds that was poaching the chickens at home, I was like, it can't be. And the last time I ran away because the chicken was chasing me for saving the chicks from the goshawk. So this time around, I was like, I need to capture this, only to find out that I'm going to re-injure my knee trying to get the picture because it was dark. I was not supposed to be at work. I was triggering alarms that were not supposed to be triggered. My boss knew that the alarms were triggered. He didn't know what was happening. So they found out via the security cameras that I was at work after I was searching for birds. So the knee was not the biggest problem. The boss finding out I was at work after hours was a bit of a thing to explain. I'm like, boss, goodness. Maybe going forward, you'll find you'll find some images.
Unless you're a birder who actually understands that that's the truthful explanation.
I think the fact that the bird flew into a place with the cameras pointing at it saved me. I may have been jobless before I actually got jobless, but it was nice that the guy was also into nature and conservation, so he didn't mind that I was there. But I don't think he actually liked the fact that campus security had to come through and check what was going on at work.
Oh my goodness.
So the injury wasn't the big problem. The fact that campus security came in and had to check the cameras. Explaining that.
Did you get the bird?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I didn't know what it was because I put it online actually on BirdLife, and someone asked her son who works at Kruger to ID it for me. And since then, I've even forgotten how an African goshawk looks. So I'm happy about that as well.
But that's one of the most amazing things, though, about the birding community is the network that we've now created through social media and various other platforms. That to take a photo like that of an African goshawk, a bird you may not necessarily know what it is, and to share it so widely within seconds, minutes, you've got a positive identification on it. It's an incredible sort of element of this hobby that we all share. But your photography has also taken you to some interesting places. I remember you telling me a story about photographing a swee waxbill that saw you stuck in a thicket.
Yes. No, actually, I got stuck in a stream that isn't too deep. But for me, because I can't swim, I don't do large bodies of water, like bigger than a bathtub. So anything bigger than that is... So now I see this bird, it's fluttering around, but it lands on a reed across the stream. And in there we had Venus flytraps, we had what are those? The lotus flowers.
Yeah.
Now you're not supposed to go in there without a wader on. I didn't realize how deep it was until I had to walk in white sneakers.
Oh my goodness.
For the bird. Luckily, it was not a common waxbill, it was a swee.
Yeah.
But trying to get to it, I had to get over my fear of water, which wasn't a lot. Because when I tell people, they're like, maybe you would have learned to swim, but like the water was knee deep.
Yeah.
But for me, that was the
It's still
biggest.
intimidating, isn't it?
Exactly. And especially when you don't realize that it's that deep.
Yeah.
Because for me, I was like, ankle deep, I can do it. Next thing I know,
Absolutely.
I'm knee deep in water and there's algae and there's now I don't want to break the lotuses. It was a whole lot
So
of
you learned
things.
how to swim for the swee.
I learned how to wade for the sea.
Yeah.
I'm
But
not.
Dan, that reminds me as well of, I think you might have a story similarly about not quite messing your white sneakers, but tell us about that flufftail.
Yes, so for a very long time, buff-spotted flufftail was one of my most wanted birds.
Okay.
Flufftails are obviously understandably sought after. They're all impossible to see. And it was one big birding day. I think friends of mine will recall this as well. One big birding day, we heard this buff-spotted flufftail calling. And this is a bird that had eluded me for years preceding this. But it was on the opposite side of a small stream that was flowing out of the Belmont Valley sewerage works just near Grahamstown. Well, birders being birders, this isn't going to stop us. And we traipsed through the stream in pursuit of the buff-spotted flufftail. Needless to say, we did not see the buff-spotted flufftail.
Oh, wow.
But we got home that afternoon and there was a bucket full of jick waiting for us, and we were instructed to jick ourselves down before we were allowed anywhere near the driveway. So it's, yeah.
It seems we all have a bit of a muddy story. So those of you who've done some birding in Botswana may have heard of Lakengami. Now, Lakengami goes way back to pre-David Livingstone days, but it's supposedly one of his big finds. And it's on this ancient map of Botswana as this great lake. And it's just south of Maun in Bots. And the big waters of the Okavango, I think it was something like 2004, came down for the first time in 20 years, the biggest water in 20 years. And so there was word going around Bots that Lakengami had water in it for the first time in 20 years. So we head down there, and nobody knows about Lakengami. We literally asked all the locals. We'd heard from someone, I think Map Ives, who's a very well-known ecologist and birder in Botswana, that you need to drive X Ks past this town, get to the village, and then in Botswana, people signpost a lot of turnoffs with things like car doors.
Yes.
So like the semi-rusted
Yes.
turquoise car door, hit a left, go down the dirt track, and then the dirt road forks and keep left kind of thing. So anyways, we're driving, ask the locals, nobody knows about Lakengami. And there we are in my dad's beaten out old cruiser. And because the water rises, it comes so slowly, it lifts the soil and the sand, and you can't actually see the water that well. Anyways, we end up in the middle of this lake. The water's around us, but we don't know. It turned out we got stuck overnight, had to sleep in the car in this great lake.
Oh my goodness.
Livingstone's Great Lake. But here's the flip side. We woke up the next morning. It seems we weren't the only visitors to Lakengami. The sky was black with red-billed quilias in their millions.
Wow.
And I mean, literally on par with the great migrations of the Serengeti and things like that.
Wow.
It was incredible. So yeah, we get stuck in the mud, but we get just reward sometimes.
Absolutely. I've got a similar story to that. We a few years back were up in Zambia, and I managed to persuade my parents and my partner to go after the African Pitta with me, which is, everyone will know the African Pitta is this mythical, incredibly sought after but strikingly beautiful bird. But in order to see the species, you've got to wake up at well before dawn.
Yes.
It's a long drive to get up to the site. I am most certainly not a morning person, so waking up at 2:30 in the morning to go after a bird is already a challenge for me. My family are incredibly grumpy at this stage that we're going after some bird. They've got to wake up at goodness knows what time of morning to go and see it. Anyway, the birds tend to display as soon as the summer rains start. And this particular year, the summer rains started in full force. So the drive to get to the particular site where these pittas were displaying involved several stream crossings that ultimately became river crossings. And what should have been a fairly simple experience, going out and seeing these pittas, turned into a bit of a mammoth adventure. Ultimately, we got there at about 10 o'clock in the morning. And
since 2 a.m.
Since 2 a.m.
Wow.
At this point, everyone is very grumpy with me. Was this worth it? Was it worth chasing these pittas down? it took us a while, and ultimately we did get a pitta up in the tree, and it was doing its little butterfly display call and all of that. And it was just one of those things to see non-birders so completely engrossed by the sighting, to see them so sort of fixated on this bird was just such a special experience as well, that came from something so trying to get there.
I think it also plays into that thing of, as much as we birders understand it, when you get another person who's not into birding to enjoy it as much as you,
absolutely,
it's that thing that says, now you know how crazy I am.
It's a life-changing hobby in the sense that you can go to Kruger, and on a standard day in Kruger in the Skukuza area, to see the big five isn't a particularly difficult task. Sure, the rhinos and the leopards may be a bit more challenging, but on a standard day in Kruger, you can go for a drive, you can see 60, 80, 100 different bird species. And most people in the park just drive past it. They'll pull up next to you and say, and I've had it on countless experiences, you parked on the side of the road with a beautiful carmine beet or something next to the car, a vehicle will pull up next to you. What are you looking at? Oh no, it's a bird. Why are you looking at them? And they sort of storm off, leaving you in a cloud of dust. But as soon as you get involved in it, as soon as the bug bites, it becomes just absolutely contagious.
Definitely.
There's no cure.
Talking about Kruger, I think that's a good motivation for these stickers that we all know and see. And I Break for Birds being one of them.
Absolutely.
I know BirdLife South Africa actually stocks it in the store. And what I love about it is, if you put that badge of honor on the back of your car, the amount of vehicles, as you've said, that do zip on past without stopping to ask. And I was recently in the Kruger sitting at a leopard sighting right next to the road, and the car sort of, you know how you like idle up, you see if you can see anything that the other cars see. And if you don't see it immediately, something big and hairy in the bush, the fact that you got the I Break for Birds sticker, the assumption is that, okay, this guy's looking at an LBJ. Actually, I was sitting with the leopard next to
I've had exactly the same experience, where you're sitting exactly as you say. You're sitting there, the car pulls up next to you. What are you looking at? And you hear the wife in the passenger seat or whatever it is say, oh no, look, they've got the birding sticker. They're looking at birds, and they storm off. And there you've got a beautiful leopard sighting or something next to you.
Speaking of that, sorry to interrupt you. When I was working at Mountain Zebra, sorry, Granny again. Some story she doesn't know. I almost got attacked by a lion.
Oh my goodness!
Because you know the buckets that we used were tan colored. So now I didn't know why there were so many cars parked there, but I knew it was something to do with game. I'm like, okay, cool. What are they looking at? We need to pause. We have to check the fence and whatnot. So we couldn't pause because there's like a gazillion cars parked there. And I didn't realize that there was a lion feeding. So now there's like bakkies the same size everywhere. And I'm sticking out because I was standing at the back of the bakkie. And because the lion saw this one thing standing with all these uniform cars parked there, it thought I was actually coming for the kill. So it came zooming in, and I was frozen in the same spot that everyone had to hoot or whatever they were doing. I can't even remember. And the drivers were like, student, pass in through the window. And trying to pass in through the window, there was a secretary bird flying the other side. So I don't even realize whether they were looking at the lion or the bird, because there were people with the stickers that says I Break for Birds, but at the same time people were looking at the lion. I didn't even realize that it was there until it flew off. When I asked people what was going on, they're like, oh yeah, we're looking at the bird. Thank you for showing us the lion. I'm like, guys, I could have died. They're like, yeah, we get it. But next time, don't stand like that. Guess what? I stood like that for the rest of the year. But the fact that people were actually looking at the bird, and I almost died helping them find the lion, was one of those things where I was like, I'm not telling Granny this, because if I don't die here now, she's going to find a way to kill me for trying to kill myself in the wild.
Sorry, Granny, if you're listening.
I love you.
But I think we've all got that story where we've sort of put ourselves at a little bit of personal jeopardy in pursuit of a bird, either going somewhere we maybe shouldn't have. It reminds me of a story from an English chap by the name of Chris Goody. Some of the listeners may know him as the jewel hunter. He is one of the few people who managed to see each and every single species of pitta in a single calendar year. And again, to draw back to the African pitta, he described his experience walking through these dry riverbeds looking for African pittas in the southern parts of Zambia, and noting fresh elephant tracks or leopard tracks in the riverbed where he's walking up and down in pure darkness without torchlight. I've had a personal experience looking for green-breasted pitta in Uganda, where again, it's pre-dawn. You've got to get into the forest an hour before sunrise while the birds, when the birds start displaying. And we were charging through this forest full of chimpanzees, forest elephants, giant forest hogs, you name it in there. And the local armed guard we were with just suddenly screamed, turn around and run. So now you're running through this forest in pure darkness. You have no idea where you're going. You're tripping over vines. And there was a forest elephant with a calf about 10 meters above or ahead of us in the trail. And she charged us. Luckily, it was a mock charge. But I mean, I think we've all been there with birding where you sort of
almost die,
yeah. All in pursuit of some random little bird that most people in this world will never have heard of
at all. And sometimes you don't even get the bird.
Yeah,
that's the funny part, is that you almost die but you don't get the picture.
That's the fun of it, is the going out and actively looking for it.
Danger as well.
Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't, and it's the experience.
That's the fun part of it.
That's the fun part of it.
Yeah. So speaking about near-death experiences, many of the viewers have actually sent in. We asked viewers to contribute to the session this evening, so that we don't just dominate the mic. And there's some good ones that come through. And the one I actually want to start with comes from one of our country's, probably arguably one of the best storytellers, former editor of Getaway magazine, David Brister. And he's happy for me to name him on this story, but he was basically up in the Zambezi shooting a cover story for Getaway. The aim was to get the Batoka Gorge with the rainbow. And they were also looking for African finfoot. And so they were out basically around these islands with his lens in front of him in a canoe. And as you know, canoeing on the Zambezi can be quite interesting, looking for finfoot in the sort of the fringes of these islands. And I'm going to let David describe it, but he basically says there was a huge explosive sound behind him, and suddenly they were floating airborne. It was the strangest feeling, and we were flying through the air and landed with a big splash. So David, if you're listening, I hope we're doing justice to your near-death experience. Obviously, it was not an African finfoot. Yeah. It was a hippopotamus.
Oh, wow.
I hope the lens survived the trip.
Definitely.
I think so. Anyways, they hit the water, and he said, his guide said, hippo, swim through it as fast as you can, but don't splash. So, I mean, you know, in a near-death experience, and apparently you must not swim in a frantic state. And
don't splash.
Glide.
Don't run when the lion charges you.
And you run.
So the long and the short of it is that thankfully the hippo didn't chase after them, but it did bellow at them as they got out the water at the island. And he was also saying this was the days of film, before digital cameras. So his film and his lenses were in the canoe with him, and this hippo almost flipped the canoe. So the film obviously went flying and floating down the great mighty Zambezi, and his spools were obviously in the bag. Thankfully, his those waterproof cases, he went trawling the river's edge the next day, I think, and managed to find enough spools, some surviving spools. And because they were in their plastic case, some of them survived, and his pictures were protected. And one of the covers of Getaway magazine was actually from that expedition, from the Batoka Gorge. So that it made it onto the front cover. So that was
it was worth it.
That's incredible.
It was worth it.
Yeah.
I almost died, but I got it.
Oh my goodness.
Exactly, got the shot.
And for a bird like a finfoot as well.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I feel like I got the shot as a dangerous precedent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Dan, I know you said you also had some interesting inbound tourists in some of your further afield Africa expeditions.
Look, I think there's a certain description that can characterize most birders. I don't think it's necessarily true to, well, I think it's true to all birders, essentially, that we've all got our standard khaki attire that we go into. And I always think it's funny going into an airport where, particularly in a place like Madagascar or somewhere that's renowned for birding groups coming through, and you can spot the birders from a mile away. I mean, I do it. We all do it. You're in your standard khakis because, of course, you've got to be camouflaged. You've got your binocular straps when you're going onto the plane, and the airport security is giving you a look from the side windows.
What are the import
to make
values of
sure,
these binoculars?
absolutely, but also what are they spying with their binoculars?
Yes.
Little do they know it's the little wagtail on the runway, not where the planes are parking or whatever. You also have to tuck your socks in, or sorry, the bottom of your trousers into your socks, which is a fine fashion choice. I mean,
Amazing.
fashion, Paris Fashion Week, we're coming for
Two-tone.
you. Yeah, two-tone. But all in case you get the chiggers or the pepper ticks, leeches, whatever it is. You've then got to have your floppy hat. I mean, you can't have a cap, because we were talking about this just before the session, that a peak cap is one of the worst inventions for birders.
Learned that
you pick up your binoculars and your cap falls off.
Yes.
So there's the standard look that defines us, and to everyone else, I think it's utterly ridiculous. But
I think that's why they call us the crazy ones, because
Absolutely.
only we are proud of looking like that, because we know why we look like that.
But it's also the behavioral elements that come with it. I mean, how many times have you, me, any of us been leopard crawling after some bird, and you're in the camps in Kruger and you're leopard crawling after some hornbill, and there's a lady sitting on the table next to you feeding it slop chips, because but you want that perfect eye level shot, and so you've got to get down on your belly in the dirt
and having to explain why you're doing that to a non-birder without sounding like you need to be put in a mental asylum.
No, absolutely.
Yes.
I think that's one of the beauties of a session like this, is we amongst friends. And just to go back to some of those friends who have submitted embarrassing and many life-threatening experiences. So Gisela Ortner, who many of you will know from helping organize Flock to Marion, was also in the Kruger Park. Seems that there's many near-death experiences in the Kruger Park, and looking at saddle-billed storks in the riverbed. So thanks, Gizzy, for this story. And I'm sure many of you can identify with these other near-death encounters. And while they had their binoculars to their eyes, you forget that you've now got blinkers on for the rest of the bushveld around you. Just to clarify, they were at one of those alight spots in Kruger where you can safely get out of your vehicle.
Okay.
But it took the vehicle behind them to idle up and basically say, you guys need to get back in your car. There's 6 lines just meters behind you.
Oh my goodness.
That said, apparently it still took some convincing, because they were like, we're birding, we're fine. So a good advert for birders.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And
we okay.
also in Kruger, we've got Jean Thomas, who speaking about in the camp and people watching you. So she was sitting outside her chalet and just watching someone set up their braai. And it was obviously summer and migrant season. And he had the meat on the braai and laid out his table and everything. And she says that he went into his chalet to get salt. And a kite. Obviously, kites are quite well known for stealing your lunch at picnic sites and camps. Basically grabbed his meat from the grill, and the guy came out looking bewildered and couldn't figure out where his meat had gone.
What happened?
And he looked across at her and basically, as if to say,
you stole my meat.
Did you see what happened? It's just crazy. They're in the camp. How many stories like this there are?
Yeah. We had that on the beach at Cape Vidal last year, but we were also sort of sunbathing on the beach, laying sort of belly down on the beach, suntanning, not realizing that all of our snacks in the basket next to us were being picked off one by one by the kites coming down.
I think we all have that story where you can't believe it until you have like a footage of it.
Absolutely.
Because now the guy, I'm sure, was looking at her like, really, a kite? Do you think that I'm that stupid?
Yeah.
But at the same time, if someone had caught that on camera, they'd be like, that actually happened to me.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of those things where it's too true to be believable, but at the same time, you just have to believe it, because birds are birds.
Yeah. But birding's one of those incredible hobbies as well, that every time you go out, it can be a species that you've seen time and time again.
Yes.
Every time you see it, it's doing something different. And that's part of the joy of it.
Yes.
And I can't understand how anyone would ever get bored of birding, going out and sort of having these new behavioral experiences or seeing birds do something unique. And as you say, so often you kick yourself because you'll be having a quick bathroom stop in the bush, and that rare bird that you've traveled so far to see pops out in front of you, and your camera, your binoculars, everything is back in the car. It happens time and time again. Yeah.
I think it goes back to that thing of birds that you see all the time. For example, I see the hoopoes all the time in summer. And if you could go through my gallery, all 2011 of my memory cards, there's a hoopoo somewhere there. And it's because one day they're doing something else.
Yeah.
I don't know they could sunbathe, because now I saw them lying with their back and their wings are open and they're just facing the sun. And I was like, what is going on? Like, why? But I don't have the camera. Now, when I explain it to someone, they're like, no, you're lying. But then at the same time, I see it with the crest up because the chickens are feeding close by. And I remember I posted it on the BirdLife group. I saw one in our crawl, and then because we don't have goats anymore, so it's just there for the chickens to lay their eggs, or if we have a ceremony at home. So I can go in there because it's family. So I was chasing the chickens, and then I'm like, okay, cool. And then I see a hoopoo. I run back to the house. I'm like, okay, cool. I hope when I come back, I don't skate away or the chickens are skated away. I come back. I'm like, oh, it's still there. I leopard crawled our fence line so that I could get close enough. And I think I was like a meter away from it. And the crest was up because it saw me. But when I stood up, I was like knee deep in chicken poo. And when I posted the picture there, I was like, do I tell people or do I show them that I was actually knee deep in chicken poo? And it's not just the nice one that's cute. It was the stanchy one that sticks to your body.
No.
And when my granny saw that, she's like, I keep on telling you, these birds of yours are going to get you into trouble. But it's nice because now I have a story to tell. And the picture, I got it.
I was about to say, but the question is, did you get the shot?
I got the picture. But at the end of the day, my granny was like, I know you love my chickens, but I don't think you love them that much. Because now I had laundry to do because of chickens and the birds. But at least I got the picture.
You got the picture.
I got the picture.
You get the shot and all is forgiven.
It's all worth it. It's all worth it.
I'm going to quickly go across to Andy Featherston from Witwatersrand Bird Club, and just speaking about birds' behavior and behaving badly. Andy says, a couple of years ago, I had to travel to Cape Town on business. And after I finished my meeting, I had a bit of spare time. And as we do when we finish a meeting early, of course, we pop out and get a couple of extra hours.
Absolutely.
You have to.
In Dan's case, at the sewerage works. So he went off to Cape Point Nature Reserve. And he says it was a blustery day, so I parked my hire car in an open area where I could watch the occasional T-square, so white-chinned petrel. And he was so engrossed in the birding and startled when his passenger door opens. Again, those blinkers on with your binoculars, it's dangerous. So much so that passenger door opened and somebody got in. So he just assumed he was going to be held up. I know that Cape Point area can be dangerous. And something would be stolen or the car would be taken. So he turns, he says, to face this intruder, and came face to face with the biggest, hairiest, and ugliest, I think you've guessed it by now, male baboon he's ever seen. Passenger seat. It gets even better. He says he quite calmly sat there as if waiting for a ride and looking at me as if to say, okay, where are we going? He then helped himself to a chocolate bar.
Of course.
And a half-finished bottle of Coke.
Of course.
And eventually a nearby taxi driver came to Andy's rescue and basically tried to shout and chase off Handsome Harry, as he calls him. And he says between him and the taxi driver, the baboons, because the taxi driver pulled up next to Andy, but on the baboon side.
Yeah.
So now where do you think the baboon's going to escape?
It's
got to go through the driver's door. So he just said his only escape was through me. So I quickly opened my door and bailed out to be swiftly followed by my hairy friend. And this hairy friend was last seen running for the fynbos
with Coke
clutching the Coke and the chocolate, pursued by a couple of park rangers. So please, if you're watching White-chinned petrels on
Cape Point,
please
Make sure.
be very careful.
Lock your doors.
And then another one from this time from a BirdLife South Africa colleague, Alan Lee. He was so busy looking for button quails up in the Baviaanskloof.
Yeah.
He called the story Baviaans, Button Quails, and Buffalo. And you can just guess how it ends. And he had his binoculars looking for these button quails. He was doing a survey out in the field. And by wandering out into the reserve away from the cottage where they were staying, counting button quails, he didn't realize that between him and the cottage, which was now 100 meters, 3 Duggar boys had moved in. And he basically just said that 2 of them moved off after a long stare down, but the one wouldn't let him pass.
Yeah.
There's always that one Duggar boy. It just gives you that look.
Yes.
He's got some fantastic photos. Again, photos seem to be what everyone's after. So it can definitely get you in a bit of trouble, this birding thing.
Yeah.
Yes, it can. And it's so much fun when you talk about it. But during that whole course, you're like, ish, is this how I die? Like, really? Is this what they're going to write? Die trying to photograph a bird?
At the risk of making the session too much about primates, one of my other favorite birding memories was, again, the same trip to Uganda, where we were in Kabale Forest, where we got charged by that forest elephant. Later that afternoon, we were out looking for chimpanzees, and we were exploring the section along the main road. Now, they have a species of baboon there called the olive baboon, which is a much gentler species. It's largely herbivorous, but it is somewhat more intimidating than the Chakma baboon that we get here in South Africa, and that they've got
Which says a lot.
Yeah, they've got this large sort of lion-like mane, which makes the males look especially intimidating. Anyway, as I mentioned, they're largely herbivorous. Now, in Uganda, the staple food is bananas or plantains. So down the road came this truck covered in bananas on the back. I mean, bunches and bunches of bananas. And it seems to be a trick that these baboons have learned, that the entire troop sits in the middle of the road. So the truck has to slow down enough that the scouts can jump onto the back.
Teamwork.
And here these baboons were tossing as many bananas off the back of this truck. Again, it's one of those experiences that you wish you had a camera, because no one would ever believe you. These baboons were tossing as many bananas off the back of the truck as possible. As the truck then started to accelerate, you see this sort of panic set into the baboon's eyes, that does he keep tossing more and more bananas off, or is it time to now jump? And it reached the point where all these baboons sort of lurched themselves off into the roadside bushes, and then they all sort of scurry down to enjoy the feast. But one of those experiences where you just have to, I mean, you need a camera to document it. Just incredible.
So bringing it back to South Africa from the deep forests of Uganda, many of you will know Lance Robinson, and he's actually giving a workshop on Saturday on bushveld birding. So this one, at least not as life-threatening as some of the others. I think it's a good, healthy direction that we're getting ourselves into here. And he says a group of birding friends and I made a special detour to the Agatha plantation near Zanin, which many of you will be familiar with. This was to get his first bat hawk. And you would have seen that the bat hawk is obviously a very elusive species. I know it features in the latest African BirdLife magazine. So they were given a general GPS location, which, as you know, can be problematic on its own. And en route to Bloberg Nature Reserve, we arrived naturally excited, coupled with nervous apprehension that a prospective lifer obviously gives, as we know. Parked in front, we parked and spent the next few hours walking up and down the sand road, scanning the trees keenly for this well-known pair of bat hawks at the exact pin location, obviously. But our time was limited and it was getting unseasonably hot. Eventually, we could no longer spend any time looking for this bat hawk, and so we reluctantly trudged back to the vehicle in order to get going, which we know is very demoralizing feeling. But there, right above our vehicle, sat our bat hawk, maybe only 2 meters. It had been there the entire time.
Oh my goodness.
And it reminds me, Sandisa and I were talking earlier, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think you said one of your lifers that you're after is this Narina. And Sandisa was hating me earlier because I lived in Barberton for a few years, and they're pretty much Narina trogons everywhere. And a friend and I casually came back from like a game of squash or something in the morning, and drove up our driveway. And I'm not kidding, this driveway was like this ridiculous angle. And so the car used to make such a noise getting up the driveway, and it would screech its way up. But despite this, we drove up and we were about to get out the car, and sitting in the open, completely uncharacteristically, is this supposedly shy Narina trogon, like literally above our windscreen. We sat in the car quietly and watched it for 2-3 minutes right in front of us, didn't turn its back on us like they so often do.
Amazing.
Like bat hawks, Narina trogons.
That's a bird that so many people struggle with. I remember my life in Narina trogon. It's one of those memories that sort of, there's these few birds that for life you'll remember your first ever sighting of that bird. And Narina trogon was one such species for me. So it was a similar experience there. I had spent hours trudging through this riverine forest up in Zambia looking for my life in Narina trogon. I must have been 10 at the time. And eventually exhausted, dehydrated, give up. No, I'm not seeing it today.
As usual.
Let's go home. So I go back to the main homestead, and my dad came and picked me up about 10 minutes later, and we start driving out. I'm saying, oh, Dad, I'm so disappointed. I didn't get to see my Narina trogon. You know how long I've been looking for this bird. And as we come and cross a bridge, my dad says, oh, there's
There
one.
it is.
And he stops the car, and literally right next to the car in plain sight was this Narina trogon.
And you were there almost dying.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's the same with me with the southern ground hornbill, because the first time I saw it, I had the camera, but it was inside my bag in a taxi. So I made a sound like, ugh. So everyone thought I was dying. They're like, what is going on? Like, do you need water? But in the taxi, I'm like, no, a bird. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. They drive off. Imagine my heartbreak when we go back again, it's not there.
Oh, no.
So I saw it, I was happy. But because I'd been wanting to take a picture of it, because the first time I ever saw it, it was at a distance. I thought it was a hadida, our conversation earlier on. And I'm like, that looks like a black bird, but I don't know what it is. And my problem was trying to get to it. And then when I ran to it, it flew past me, landed on our roof, like my house, on the roof after I left my house trying to catch it. So I had to come back to my house, it was gone. Like each time I wanted to picture it, something gets in the way, but I had to run. And my knee is still wonky, but I still ran. But now I don't have that thing of I got the picture. So I'm hoping eventually when I do get a picture, I'm going to share it with everyone and be like, guys, remember,
absolutely.
Remember our conversation.
Yeah.
I got the picture.
But you also mentioned when we were speaking earlier, just before the session, that recently you came across grey-crowned crane, and it was a similar experience where the sudden gasp forced the taxi to stop, and you piled out with your camera to photograph it.
I did. And when I spoke to them and they're like, what bird is that? I was like, a grey-crowned crane. But like, what is that? I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, that's how it looks. But they didn't understand my joy. But when I saw it again with a fellow birder, he stopped. I almost crashed into the window screen, but I understood because I've been there before. And it's so much nicer when you get people who actually share the same thing. And even if you almost die together, it's that thing of, remember that fun part.
Absolutely.
Because everyone understands where we're coming from. But it's always nice to have people who share the same values and they don't almost die because you all almost die. So it's that thing.
I think we've all been in a car with a birder who's driving at one point or another where something flies over and you inevitably driving and suddenly you're off the road
follow
and then
the bird.
suddenly a quick swerve back onto the road.
This is very relevant. I mean, just a few months back, we've had all this water out towards the Vaal area, the Vaal Dam. So my wife and I were driving, and I'm definitely going to place the blame on her for this one. And I've obviously been a birder for much longer, and she's sort of getting into it through me, but often, teases me.
Yes.
So I was so chuffed that she took interest on this particular occasion, because I'm sure as many viewers or listeners will know, sometimes you like the birder and you're trying to get that person who's with you in the car to come with you and on this journey. So we're driving along this Vaal road, and then out of nowhere I see what still sometimes wonder was a juvenile African fish eagle, but turned out to be an osprey. So obviously I'm like, stop, like you said in the taxi. And she pulls off onto the side of the road. I'm like, please just reverse and go onto the side of the road before it flies away. And you know how it is, it's utter panic.
Yes.
And obviously they are around in that area, but they're very uncommon. So I pull my binoculars out, and I'm way too busy identifying this juvenile fish eagle / osprey. And she reverses into not a pothole, like a manhole. And half the car sinks into this manhole. It took us a while to push out. But I mean, at the end of the day, I was still encouraged that my wife actually agreed to reverse and go back to this osprey site. But it did cause a bit of damage to the car. I'm sure there's many people who can identify with.
But you got the sighting.
Yeah, but I got the sighting.
Did you get the shot?
I did not get the shot. I took a mental picture.
Yeah.
You see, it lasts forever.
Absolutely. Now I can't prove it was an osprey.
But getting stuck seems to be a common thread as well. So a few years back, I was guiding at the time the world's #1 lister. He had seen over 9,700 bird species in the world.
So no pressure.
So no pressure at all. And we were on one of the Comores Islands going after Anjouan skopsow, which is a bird that was believed extinct for many years. It's a black skopsow. That's beautiful. But inexplicably rare. only a few hundred individuals, only found within a few fragmented forest patches. And we had a single opportunity to try for the species. It had rained all day the previous day, so our first opportunity was washed out, hence leaving just this one evening to try. So we driving up again, terrible roads. It took us forever to get to the spot for the scops owl, and we landed up getting stuck, but down to the axle stuck.
What?
But now having a client like this particular gentleman who, so it's down to individual birds to get him over. He was aiming for that that magical 10,000 birds mark.
Wow.
And so for him, every single species counts. Well, the local guide and myself have never dug a car out of the mud so fast.
You're gonna get that paycheck.
Thankfully, it was a little Toyota Corolla, but still, the amount of mud that we had to move to get that car out, and thankfully we did see the owl.
Okay,
so,
good. You got the...
Yeah, we got the shot.
Jeez, happy client.
Yeah,
yes.
Happy client.
So we're going to go offland just a little bit, and I reached out to some of our fellow BirdLife South Africa colleagues, and thanks so much to everyone who sent through. And speaking about lifers, many of you watching probably would have been on Flock to Marion or would have heard of Flock to Marion. And Isabel Human, our HR manager, speaking about lifers on Flock to Marion, was just saying that she's a little bit embarrassed to share this because, you know, as many of us, when you're a new birder and you don't have a particular name, or you say the wrong thing around other birds, it's quite intimidating. Birders can be quite intimidating. And Isabel basically says she was so excited to be on this Flock to Marion trip. And it was that day, Albatross Thursday, when we were near Marion Island, and it was just an incredible sight. And she was so excited and made her way to the front of the boat when she wasn't on shift at the very busy Q&A desk, or the front info desk. So she said it was very crowded. I managed to find a spot right at the back, but I could climb up a pipe contraption, which I'm pretty sure is against the rules of the MSC orchestra, which allowed me to look over most of the crowd and get visibility to what was happening in the front of the boat. The atmosphere was electric, which I can definitely attest to. The excitement fueled by constant loud calls from the guides. Everybody was frantically trying to get on to whatever sightings had been called. A variety of albatrosses, petrels, etc., and then penguins. And there were so many penguin species out there in the Southern Ocean that were new to many of us. One of these, for Isabel, was a macaroni penguin with those yellow ear tufts. So Isabel was very hyped up, and she went after her sighting down to the desk for her next shift. And Mark Anderson, the BirdLife South Africa CEO, asked her, you know, what did you see? Have you been birding, and have you managed to get out there? And very proudly, she rambled off a few petrels and albatrosses, and then told Mark that she had seen a spaghetti penguin. So I think we can all identify with those moments. So thanks Isabel. And then, back to the theme of injuries. I know many of my colleagues out in the field doing research and conservation work have been injured by some species. And I know Ernst Retief, for example, sent through a story about being kicked by a secretary bird. Which could be quite painful, I imagine.
Yes.
Reason Nyangera, also on Bird Island, it's known that the African penguins can be a little bit aggressive.
Vicious.
And I think he took a knock from a penguin as well. But I want to use this opportunity to play a couple of voice notes. So some people sent through voice notes, and we're very grateful for you sharing such stories that make you look compromised. So the first one we want to play is actually from Andrew de Block, who's the AV Tourism Project Manager at BirdLife South Africa. And it also speaks to being injured while out researching.
So my fun anecdote, and an embarrassing one at that, goes back to my days as the resident penguinologist at BirdLife South Africa, before my days working as an AV Tourism Project Manager. And I was running a research project where we were putting little GPS backpacks on penguins to see where their most important fishing grounds were. So this process first requires catching the penguin, which is a process on its own, where you are lying front down, groping around in a deep burrow, generally with your front covered in what used to be fish before it had gone through a penguin's gut, and grabbing these penguins and yanking them out of their burrows. And we do a little bit of processing before we do the GPS installation, if you can call it that. And one of those involves weighing the penguins. So the way you weigh penguins is you tie a little belt around underneath their flippers, and you use like a fishing scale. You know, if you pick up a fish on a scale and it sort of hangs in the air and tells you how heavy it is, it's the same thing for penguins. And when you pick up a penguin with that scale and throw it into the air, it's literally the first flight a penguin has ever been on. So they're very, very confused, and they look around and they're a little bit bewildered. And then when you have your weights and you've written it in your notebook, you need to bring the penguin safely back under control, because there's a very sharp pointy end which can do some damage. And the way you do that is you grip the penguin behind the head, so you can control that pointy end. Now, I was dealing with a particularly aggressive and ferocious male penguin, which was a big one at about 4.8 kilos. And as I went to grab behind the penguin around his head to control his pointy end, I happened to miss because he was wriggling about, and I gripped down on the neck, which meant that the head still had a full range of movement. And that pointy end was aimed at the closest part of me, which happened to be my chest. And I was wearing a t-shirt, and the penguin managed to rip right through the t-shirt, and there's no other way to put it other than it ended up piercing my nipple. And there was blood running down my front, and I had to get the bird under control again, under a lot of duress and personal pain. But yeah, that's the story of how a penguin pierced my nipple.
And the penguin will never be the same again.
That's one way to get a piercing, though.
Oh. But I think we've all been there, particularly, I mean, I may be a bit biased as a seabird researcher, but when I was doing my PhD on red-footed boobies, it was my first week out in the field, very excited to be working on this cool bird, and handled a few confidently, and then went to grab one, but didn't quite get the technique right. I was still sort of quite new to the business and learning about it. And red-footed boobies have strongly serrated bills.
Yes.
And it grabbed the fleshy part between my thumb and my index finger and just pulled back. And it just created this 2 perfect incisions on either side.
God.
Needless to say, I needed to have stitches. I lost dexterity in my hand for the next couple of days. It's working on birds is no
it's not as fun as we make it to
simple
be.
task. It's
Yeah, took one for the team.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Hard at work doing conservation. So another one we've got in is from Dr. Melissa Whitecross, who many of you will know as one of the hosts of Conservation Conversations. And yeah, it talks about, again, GPS coordinates gone wrong.
I definitely think one needs to recognize the incredible talent that Google Maps has for getting birders lost, particularly in the northern Zululand region. I was out birding with a few mates in Isimangaliso, and we decided to head over to Ndumo for the honorary Rangers weekend there. And dear Google decided that the very dry Pongola River at the time the map was constructed looked like a road, and took us through several little villages on jeep tracks until we ended up through this mealie field and on the banks of the beautiful, full flowing Pongola River, looking at the Ndumo fence, this impenetrable boundary. Needless to say, we had to backtrack and eventually find our way to the main entrance. But I think there will be many a birder out there with a tail linked to Google Maps and their ability to take us to places we probably never should have been. The positive note was that when we got down to that end point, we saw a red-chested cuckoo, which happened to be a yearbird. So every mishap has a silver lining or a golden tick, I guess.
Oh my goodness, I think we've all been there as well, getting lost on out birding or on tour or whatever it might be.
Yeah. I got lost and I almost walked into a spider web.
Oh.
Because I was running away from mice. I'm not a big fan of rodents. Like even snakes, I need to know a snake is there, then I'm cool. But if it just sneaks up on me, so I'm very skittish when I hear something crawling. So because I was avoiding that, I almost walked face first into a garden orb spider
Ooh.
web, and it's massive.
And those are nasty there.
And it's massive and it's
Yeah.
everywhere. And I don't like spiders. Like I don't mind them, but because of that, I still have heebie-jeebies. And that's because I was running away from mice. I got lost. I didn't know which direction to go. But at the end of the day, I got the picture of the garden of spider.
Oh, got it again.
Yes.
Sometimes it's nice to just be lost in birds.
Absolutely.
You know, like, and game drives, as you said, are just not the same when you're just seeking the big five. And one example, you know, just to bring it back to breaking for birds and encouraging, you know, those who are watching to slow down and just take it easy and notice the smaller things. We were driving just south of Satara. And, you know, I always have this debate about which is the most accurate bird. I don't know if you guys have some thoughts on this when it comes to alarm calling. So I often like to slow down for those francolins, but so often it's a false alarm. Squirrels, also false alarm often. And then you get more into like the starlings, which I found to be a little bit more accurate when there's an alarm call. Like, for example, a water monitor raiding a nest. And then I was driving down and these gray go-away birds were going really crazy on top of this tree. And I was like, okay, there's something happening here. And we came to just a slow crawl, and it was through thick bush. And you just saw these spots moving. And again, uncommon sightings. It wasn't a leopard, it wasn't a cheetah. It was a serval cat. And it was hunting. And it was like hunting and pouncing and hunting and pouncing. And because the bush was so thick, we kept losing it. And we literally carried on driving and followed these lurries and the go-away birds. And they were going from tree to tree on top of the tree as they do. And it was such a good marker for where the serval cat was. So, I mean, I don't know if you've had any similar exchanges with a bird that's been a marker for something else.
It's actually been a marker for itself, and I didn't know that what it was. Doug Newman helped me with that because me and bird calls are not best friends. But I just heard something every 5 meters. I would hear something going crazy, but I didn't realize that I was the predator that was actually chasing away these birds. I'm like, I want to see what bird it is, and I couldn't for the life of me for a good 30 minutes find these birds until I stopped trying to follow the sound. When I turned around, it was a white-browed sparrow weaver, and it was a lifer for me on that day because I didn't know what it was. And until I recorded it, I was in the middle of nowhere. And even if I actually injured myself, I wouldn't have found any help. But because I was following these birds and my knee was still wonky, it has just rained. It was the same day I actually saw the barn swallows for the first time. So I got 2 lifers on that day, but I wasn't even looking for the white-browed sparrow weavers. I was just following a sound that kept on going crazy every time I moved. And when I stopped actually chasing the sound, I turned around, boom, it was there. So it's one of those things where even if you don't pay attention to where you're going, something will call your attention. Next thing you know, a lifer.
Absolutely.
I find birdsong just absolutely incredible. And a friend of mine, a well-renowned birder in South Africa, many of the listeners may know him, Rick Nuttall, has started birding a lot by sound. And actively going out and recording different sounds, recording different species calling, and how different birds in different parts of the country sound completely different. And that's been taken one step further. And a chap by the name of Derek Solomon near Kruger has now actually been doing sound safaris, where he takes blind people on safari. They can't necessarily see the birds, but he, with a directional parabolic dish, he records the sounds, plays it through earphones for these blind people to listen to, and then he has the running commentary that goes with it. I think that's just an incredible extension of birding and our sort of observationary hobby that we have.
I think it puts into context some of these stories. Some of them are painful, some of them are hilarious, and whether it's the deep forests of Uganda or the islands of Marion and into Kruger Park, we've all got these stories. And at the end of the day, it's for me, birds are like just a huge part of the environment. It's a way of appreciating the environment and slowing down for a bird call and seeing something like a serval hunting. It's just a fantastic way to appreciate nature.
And be in touch with it without even realizing you were not in touch with it. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think that we need to wrap up. There are tons of stories. We could probably go on all night, and I'm sorry for those we didn't get to. We still have more that are coming in right now. And what we plan to do is to showcase some of these stories after the African Bird Fair, perhaps in a Conservation Conversations webinar episode.
That'll be great.
Yeah, you can also catch Dan giving a couple of talks. So Kenya.
Yes, I'm doing 2 talks at the Bird Fair this year, one on birds and big game for Kenya, and the other is about tropical seabirds, some of the work that I've been doing on tropical seabirds, but also just a general introduction to the birds of the Indian Ocean.
Fantastic. And Sandiswa is in conversation with renowned media personality Jenny Cruz-Williams on Saturday as well. So yeah, please look out for that to catch more from Sandiswa and Dan. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys for sharing some of these stories together and making everybody feel better about their own embarrassing moments. And yeah, continue to enjoy the rest of the African Bird Fair.
Yep.
And we look forward to do the exclusive books interview with Jonathan Franzen, also by Jenny Cruz-Williams and BirdLife CEO Mark Anderson. So catch that coming up shortly. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Andy.
Us.
Thank you, Sandiswa.
It's a pleasure.